So, here's a massive question. How do you square one all-powerful God with a Son who is also worshipped as divine? This was one of the biggest challenges the early church had to tackle. And today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and, well, controversial answers they came up with: adoptionism. Okay, let's get into it.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the puzzle that had everyone scratching their heads. Then we'll look at the pretty elegant solution adoptionism offered. We'll break down what it actually taught, see who was promoting it and who was fighting against it, and then finally, we'll get to the church's official response and why this whole ancient argument is still so incredibly important today.
All right, first up, the theological puzzle. To really get this, you have to put yourself in the mindset of the first Christians. They had this fierce, non-negotiable belief that they inherited from their Jewish roots. There is only one God, period. Worshipping anyone or anything else, that was the ultimate no-go. And yet, their entire faith revolved around Jesus Christ. They worshipped him. They called him the Son of God. So how on earth could they do both? How could they worship Jesus as divine without breaking that fundamental rule of monotheism and, becoming polytheists? That was the huge theological knot they absolutely had to untangle.
So into this confusion, a new idea starts to pop up in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And you know what? It seemed like a really clean, straightforward answer. It was a solution that kept God the Father totally unique and supreme, while still giving Jesus this incredibly special, exalted place.
And that idea was called adoptionism. Now, it also had another name that's super revealing: Dynamic Monarchianism. That name tells you everything about its main goal: protecting the monarchy, the sole, undivided rule of God. The idea was that God's power, his dynamis, came down and rested on the man Jesus. But that didn't make Jesus God from the very beginning.
But how did that actually work in their view? What did they really believe happened? Let's unpack the core claims of the adoptionist system.
So, the adoptionist story of Jesus went something like this. Step 1. Jesus was born a totally normal human being, just like you and me. Step 2. He lived a perfect, sinless, completely obedient life through his own willpower. And then step 3, because he was so morally perfect, God chose to adopt him. And they meant this literally. It was a real promotion, a moment in time, maybe at his baptism, maybe at his resurrection, where the man Jesus was given the title and the status of Son of God.
And here's the absolute key takeaway from their view. For adoptionists, Jesus was not God by his very nature. He was born, as the early writers put it, a psylos anthropos, which basically means a mere human. His sonship was a reward. It was a status he earned. It wasn't who he was from eternity, but what he became. You can really see how they were trying to keep God the Father in a category all by himself.
Now, this wasn't just some wacky idea a couple people had. It was actually pushed by some pretty influential thinkers, which, of course, led to some serious pushback from the rest of the church.
The idea really gets traction in the 2nd century with a guy named Theodotus of Byzantium. By the 3rd century, it's being championed by a really powerful figure, Paul of Samosata, who was the bishop of Antioch. But here's the crazy part. Even after it was condemned over and over, the idea was so compelling that it just popped right back up again in 8th century Spain. That just goes to show you how persistent this simple solution really was.
Okay, so faced with this major challenge, the mainstream church had no choice. It had to figure out its own understanding and explain it with a whole new level of precision. And this reaction, this pushback, would literally define the future of Christian belief.
So the church leaders, they all gather at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, and they knew the stakes were ridiculously high. The answer they came up with would shape Christianity forever.
And this line from the Nicene Creed, this is the knockout blow to adoptionism. Just listen to the language. Begotten, not made. See, a craftsman makes something that's different from himself, but a father begets a son who has the same nature. And that phrase, of the same essence, homousios in Greek, that was the final word. It declared that the Son shares the exact same divine being as the Father. He's not some creature who got promoted. He is God by nature.
Let's just put these two views side by side so it's crystal clear. On the adoptionist side, you have a man who is adopted as son because he earned it. On the Orthodox side, you have Jesus who is eternally the Son by his very nature. For adoptionism, you kind of have two separate beings, God and the man he elevates. But for orthodoxy, you have one divine person who has two natures, fully divine and fully human.
I mean, the difference is just fundamental.
Now, I know this might all seem like a really abstract, dusty old debate, but for the early church fathers, this was everything. The very heart of their faith was on the line. This wasn't just about using the right words. It was about the nature of salvation itself.
So what was the big deal? Why was this idea of an adopted Jesus so incredibly dangerous in their eyes? Well, think about it. If Jesus was just the ultimate human success story, a guy who lived so perfectly that God gave him a promotion, what does that mean for the rest of us?
The great defender of orthodoxy, a guy named Athanasius, just hit the nail on the head with this. His point is brilliant, and it's simple. You can't give away something you don't have by nature. If Jesus is just an adopted son himself, then all he has is grace that was given to him. He can't give us a share in the divine life. Only the true, natural Son of God can give us what is his own to give, a real adoption as sons and daughters of God.
And that, right there, is why this heresy matters so much. Adoptionism basically turns the Savior into just a really good role model. It drains the Incarnation of all its power, and in the process of fighting it, the Church was forced to create the very language we still use to talk about Jesus. This ancient argument is literally baked into the DNA of modern Christian belief. Which leaves us with a final, fascinating thought. While adoptionism was rejected as a massive error, you have to wonder, did it serve a purpose? By asking such a radical question about who Jesus was, it forced the Church to come up with a clearer, a deeper, and a much more profound answer. An answer that has echoed for nearly 2,000 years.